Julia, thank you for that very lovely welcome. I am Jen Krieger. I am Chief Agile Architect at Red Hat. I work in the Products and Technologies division, so that is basically every product that you know that Red Hat puts out. OpenShift, Red Hat Enterprise Linux, our middleware division producing JBoss products, pretty much anything that you know or use. I am working with the teams that actually produce those technologies. A lot of people ask me what Chief Agile Architect means. It is a made-up title that me and my boss came up with. We decided to give myself that title for a lot of different reasons, but what it boils down to is a couple of things. I am a cat herder. I am a camp counselor, a career advisor, a meeting facilitator, a meeting canceller. But most importantly, I work with teams on a day-to-day basis to understand that they own their fate and they actually can make change happen at their organization. Today, I'm here to talk to you about a few things, most importantly, about the way that Red Hat actually does business. We have a very unique culture. Most companies that I've worked for in the past tend to be very command and control, where one person at the very top of the company makes decisions and everybody has to fall in line. If that is you, feel free to raise your hand. Red Hat is not like that. We are more open. We like to have opinions and we like to express opinions, and it's really okay with our management team if somebody has a very strong opinion. The interesting thing about this is when I was first looking at Red Hat for a potential career, I actually didn't believe that it was possible that there was an organization that represented the things that I felt were important. But after working there for 4.5 years, it continuously surprises me that we actually are capable of doing these things. I discovered this video online, and I think it represents, let's see if I can actually get it to play here. It represents what I do for a living very, very seriously, exactly what it is. Oops, I did not press play. This is what I do. If you were wondering who the kittens represent, any guesses? Yeah, developers, any other guesses? So I also think the kittens represent my executive management team. They represent my QE team, documentation team, my release management team. It's pretty much anybody that works at Red Hat, these kittens. That kitten off to that's Jim Whitehurst, that kitten that just tried to walk off the screen. This is what my job looks like. So all those things I was listing before are really representative of what it is that I do. Back in 2007, I was working at a very small finance company. It had maybe about IT department of about 35 people. And our CIO at the time legitimately, like I don't know how Scott Adams knew, he must have been in the room, but legitimately put us at a table and had this exact conversation. She said to us, we were doing waterfall at the time, and it wasn't working. We were very slow at giving our customers anything new. And she had gone to a meeting, and she had heard about that Agile software development thing, and she wanted us to experiment with it and try it out for a little while. She sent us to a 5-day training class, and it literally was the worst class I have ever taken in my life. I still remember like the gut pain of boredom that I was experiencing when I was in that classroom. Does that sound familiar? Yeah? So in this class, we learned all about how to do Scrum. We learned estimations, we learned all the techniques, we learned how to write user stories, we learned like, literally anything that had anything to do with Scrum, we learned it. But what we failed to learn was actually anything about mindset change or any of the things that we should have probably led with. I left this training incredibly optimistic. I thought, I was a project manager at the time, maybe 10 years into my career, I thought to myself as I exited this class, this was going to be a great way for me to know what those gosh darn developers were up to every day. Because I had no visibility into what they were actually working on. So I thought, gosh, this is going to be great for me because I'm going to, on a daily basis, hear what it is that they're doing. And I thought immediately, status meeting. I can know exactly where we are. And I really did believe, I was very optimistic, and I thought we were going to be incredibly successful. In fact, the person who was teaching the class, although I don't know that they meant to do this, actually, it felt like a promise. It felt like they were promising me something better, and it was going to fix all of my problems that I was having or I was perceiving the organization to have. And as you may have guessed, this is how I left the class. I was so excited. I thought that I would get speed to market. I thought I would get reduced risk. User engagement, gosh, that sounded really great. They were promising me this. I thought improved morale. We had not so great morale because it took us forever to get things out the door. And so people were tired. I thought it would give me visibility, higher quality. And I even thought it would solve world peace. And most importantly, I thought interdimensional space travel was on the list. I literally walked out of that class with hearts in my eyes. And I didn't know how it was possible that something so easy, it sounds so easy to me, could achieve all of these things. However, I'm pretty sure you all know what happened after that, right? Anybody? Yeah, I see nods. I see nods, good. So about, I want to say like maybe 2 years after that, you know, we were struggling. We kind of slogged through it, and we just did Scrum. We had our first major failure, and this failure went kind of like this. Our teams had been sitting on technical debt that looked probably bigger than Mount Everest. We never really had a chance to do anything that even looked like technical debt reduction. In fact, we were building .NET code, and we were sitting on Framework 1.0, and they had just released 4.0. And we finally had a situation in which the lead technical engineer convinced our CIO that it was about time that we upgraded because we were, you know, missing out on all the cool things that 4.0 could do for us. So we entered this 18-month-long project. Now, initially, it was not intended to go 18 months. It was, I guess, estimated to be about 6 months. It's been a while, and I kind of blocked out some of the details, but we entered this 18-month-long process in which we failed to deliver anything new to our users. And so we held the business hostage for 1.5 years. And I really do believe in that statement. This was the application that we were building internally that basically was everything we did at this company. Every user in the company used it to get their job done. So we held them hostage for 18 months. Every time we made a change to one part of one module, we broke every other module in. And does that sound like tightly coupled software? Let me tell you, there is no other in the history of tightly coupled software, this is the #1. So every time they made a change, we kind of kicked off this other horrible situation in which we had to redo our test suite. And does anybody want to guess how automated our test suite was? 0%. So we had what we called our QA department that was all manual click button testers. So they went into the application, they would click all the windows, and they would see what would happen as a result of that. They weren't allowed to go into the development environment to test because that would have been a bad idea. So they had to wait until something landed in QE or our QA environment, which might happen once every couple of weeks when the code was stable enough to be built. And so they really weren't actively testing all the time. They were just sitting around like doing that thumb twiddle thing and waiting for something to come out. And all of this was being done under the guise of Scrum. Just let that sink in for a second. So let's break this down just a little bit further. This is my team. I had a product owner. I had a Scrum Master, that was me, in case you didn't get that. And then I had some team members. There's about 5 to 7 people on this team, plus or minus 2. Sounds familiar. We were supposed to be doing 2-week sprints. We were. And we were also supposed to be pushing to production every 2 weeks. We weren't. And we had some users on the side that were sometimes happy with us and sometimes not happy with us. But, you know, the feedback loop went into place, and we would actually, have this whole system that we were promised. So this is what we were really promised via, this training class, this Agile training class, via the Scrum methodology. How many of you are doing something that looks like this today? I have some hands, kinda. I got some hand waves. All right, great. All right, it's okay. You can get your hands up there. It's easier for me to see. So here's the reality of what was really happening. So we were doing production releases probably once every 6 months. No idea. Maybe we would do it. Maybe we wouldn't. Maybe the date would slip. Maybe it wouldn't slip. But it was really dependent on where we were and how much we were, responsible enough to deliver, or how stable the code was and when we got to the point in which we were ready to deliver. And as a result of that, what happened was the users kind of decided that they didn't really like the process. It was very heavy for them. They were constantly in meetings with us, and they weren't seeing a whole lot of benefit. Who really wants to be in a meeting talking about something you're not going to get for 6 to 9 months, or even worse, a year and a half? And so they kind of moved off to the side, and they didn't want to participate in the massive amount of meetings we were having anymore. They kind of opted out of the process, and they were off to the side, just kind of going, I don't know, maybe we'll see something in the future. We don't care, because by the time you deliver it, we don't need it anymore. We figured out some other way to do it. So why bother with participating in this exercise? And so they were pretty disingenuous with the process. We had promised them something that they weren't getting. And as a result of that, our product owner kind of stepped off to the side, because they were more closely related to what was going on the customer side of the fence. And they wanted to know what our users really wanted out of the system. And so they spent more time with the users than they did with the team. And as a result, they were also kind of siding on the side of the user, saying this process doesn't work for us, it's broken, it's not working. So what does that kind of start looking to you? Seems like there's a gigantic space being built between the actual team that's developing the software and all the other people that we need to actually have working software or valuable software. So this is the common picture, and in case you didn't catch the reference, it's the proverbial wall of confusion. This is what DevOps promised to fix in terms of getting the development team more closely working with the production release teams, or AKA operations. And consequently, I think the industry now believes that it's not just a tech problem, that it goes up and down the stack. The people at the very top that are far away from the developers also feel the same pain that operations does. So this is the promise. Shout out why you think, I think this, neither Agile nor DevOps is going to work for us. Anybody have any guesses? Anyway. Yeah, that's a good answer. Any other common theme you see in the slide? It's people. People is why Agile and DevOps does not work. And so if you hear the mythical company that says, oh, we got a DevOps process in place and it's really great, it's because they're expending a massive amount of time to actually make it work for them. And this is a great illustration on why I think it doesn't work. So this guy on the right-hand side, well, if you're looking, yeah, right-hand side, he is speaking into a tin can attached to a string, and the gal on the left is listening to what he's saying. He's asking for a cheese sandwich, and what she hears is something entirely different. And this is a theme throughout pretty much everything that we actually are experiencing, regardless of whether you're using some form of technology coming from this company over here versus this company over here. It doesn't really matter what it is your tech looks like. The problem functionally is that you've got humans that just misunderstand each other. And it's about what we can send and receive and how we actually digest that information. And so I am up here thinking you're hearing what I'm saying and you're understanding what I'm communicating. But I don't know if you're actually understanding what I'm saying. If you're actually understanding my accent, the way I speak. I'm American, so maybe I'm using words that are not familiar to you. So these are all things that prevent me from communicating effectively with everybody in this room. And therefore, when we're building software or working on hardware, the same problems kind of mess us up. So I want to segue a little bit and introduce you to Ted Taylor. I met Ted about 4 years ago. He was the uncle of my sister's husband, and I knew him as Uncle Ted. Now, Ted, if you can look at that face, you could probably think Ted was a pretty angry guy, right? So I was a little intimidated by him when I first met him, because he pretty much always had this look on his face. But I think it represented what he was thinking when he was interacting with people. Ted had this way about him of making you feel like you were really the center of the universe when he was talking to you. He really was interested in what you were saying. He was interested in what you were doing. And there was always this concept of, regardless of what you said or did, he was going to accept it and just be okay with it. So it didn't really matter if he had an opinion that was contrary to his. He was like, fine, no big deal. Ted passed away at the end of October last year, and I felt pretty sad for his loss. I think the reason why, although I had only known him for a really short period of time, he had an amazing impact on my life. And I honestly didn't really know why at the time. Just the conversations and the things that he had said to me made me think about other things that were happening at work and other things that were happening in my personal life. And it just kind of made me process things a little bit differently than I would have. At his wake, I learned the reason why. Ted, I don't know why this never came up in conversation, was a professor of counseling for over 30 years at the University of California. He believed that he was just so knowledgeable about people, and I just didn't know why. I didn't understand where it came from, but obviously it was because he spent years teaching people how to actually interact with folks and get them to change their behaviors. The wisdom in his everyday conversations really resonated with me, and I was very lucky to, at this wake, his widow compiled a document, all of the words of wisdom that Ted had been saying over the past 30 years, about 30 plus quotes, and I sat there and I read them all as we were listening to his eulogies and people celebrating his life, and every single one of those 30 plus quotes was completely about working in software, and I doubt he even realized it. This is one of his nuggets of wisdom. I will find it very hard to believe that there is anybody in this room that would disagree with that sentiment. Seems pretty simple, and when you look at it through Ted's eyes, I can see something a little bit different. Ted believed in Carl Rogers' idea of person-centered counseling. And it was an idea wrapped around the idea of empathy, congruence, and unconditional positive regard. This I guess he's a psychiatrist or a psychologist, believed that if you set up this idea and this structure and an environment around people in which you accepted them for face value and accepted them for whatever they were doing, whatever they believed, that you would be giving them the best possible environment for personal growth. Since Ted's death in October, and as a result of these quotes, I've actually done a lot of personal thinking about something that happened to me at Red Hat when I first joined the company. It was not really a great story, but you're going to learn more about that in a couple of minutes. The reason why it helped me is because I realized that there was a lot of assumptions and a lot of things that I had thought about the situation, and the things that Ted said in this document really kind of related to each other, and it helped me process what had happened in a way that I had not done so before. And that is the story that I'm here to share with you today. So, how many of you have been asked to join a DevOps team? How many of you said no? Keep your hands up. Yeah. It's like, how many of you applied for a DevOps job? And I say, people are like, I'm not telling you because my boss is in the audience. Has anybody been successful with their DevOps team? Okay, that's it. You're all liars. So here is my DevOps team. I want to clarify that not all of these guys were on the team. Steve Milner's in the top right-hand corner. Ryan Cook is in the cheetah fedora, and my adopted baby brother, Tim Bilowa, is the one hugging what is a hot dog with sunglasses on, and I am in the middle. The other guys, although I adore them, were not part of our team and not present in this photo. I think he was getting a beer as Chris Murphy. We were a team that was formed in late 2013. We were asked to do the DevOps. It was a word that appeared on a strategic slide deck from our CIO. There was a bunch of initiatives, and one of those words was DevOps. And I think Lee at the time had he really wanted it to work. He really wanted us to have a better internal process. And so he was asking us to figure out what that would look like. This team worked together for quite some time. We were chartered to work for a period of 18 to 24 months. And we did this initial exercise where we brought everybody into the room, fed them pizza, and asked them to complain essentially about everything that was broken in the overall IT department. We literally captured, I feel like at the time it was over 190 individual lines of all the things that we could have worked on. And initially we worked on a few different things here and there, but after a while, after I analyzed the data and looked at it, I realized that there was a pretty simple trend, which was we need to get our code to production faster, and our process to do that wasn't really great. So we went into a period of time in which we were analyzing continuous integration and delivery tools on the market to see what might work for us. Sadly, one of the tools that we wanted to use was not open sourced at that point, so we were unable to use it, and we decided to build our own because what engineer doesn't want to build their own tool, right? So we decided to build our own tool. Who thinks we were successful in rolling this tool out? It's okay, you can be honest. This breaks my heart. No one has any sympathy or empathy for me on stage. They can't even throw their hand up. Well, I want to be honest with you, we were not really as successful as we had hoped to be, and I'm going to explain to you exactly why and share some stories about the things that had happened that prevented us from being successful. I'm reasonably away from the events that occurred. I was really angry about it shortly after I left the department. And I think that if I had done this presentation back then, you would have had a much different presentation. But now I'm more humorous about it, and I think, well, gosh, it's just human nature to be a certain way. And so these were the 4 critical mistakes that we made. So anybody know who this guy is? Oh, come on. Princess Bride. No one knows what the Princess Bride is. Okay, so this is the torturer from the Princess Bride. He was the guy who brought Wesley down into the pits of despair and tortured him and stole his life years. These are my 4 pits of despair things. So the first one was no visibility. To be frank, through no fault of anybody internally or no fault of me telling people it was a bad idea, I agreed to be both Scrum Master and Product Owner for this team. I knew going into it that it would be a very bad idea. There was no ability for me to do both roles long term. No ability to do them effectively or reasonably well. So I said, well, if I'm going to do this, you're going to have to promise to hire somebody to backfill for the Scrum Master. The reality is they said, sure, no problem, and then promptly tried but weren't successful. So I wound up doing this role, this dual role, for a very long period of time, and I think it almost killed me, to be honest, because I'm a very specific person in the way that I like to work, and I really don't like half working. I like full working, and so I try to do both jobs equally well. I wasn't really good at it. I actually was really hard to switch context and to try to do both things effectively, which essentially what wound up happening is I relied on a very small, limited group of people to tell me what was problematic about things that were happening in the department or to give us feedback on what we were doing. I didn't really share outside the team very well where we were, what we were choosing to do, and how we were choosing to do it. I relied on a very, I think it was like maybe 10 people at most. And the IT department at that time was 100 plus people, and it probably wasn't a good idea for me to be very focused in on only a few people. The second problem that happened is as a result of the fact that really no one knew what we were doing, there was a lot of assumptions being made about what it is that we were or were not doing. And as a result, we were also making assumptions about what people were thinking and doing and saying. And so this is a great example. We built the CI system on top of container technology, aka Docker. And at that time in our IT department, the only people that knew how to use Docker were the people on my team. All of our operations team had no knowledge, didn't really know how to run a Docker system in production, didn't know how to support it. And our enterprise architecture team brought those problems to our attention. And I will be quite frank, our assumption was, well, you guys are just trying to block us, so we're just going to ignore what you're saying and do it anyway. Does that sound familiar? Because I guarantee you, you probably have all made some sort of decision like that in the past. As a result, we had a situation where we built, I mean, the system was completely built, completely worked. It integrated with our ticketing system. It actually rolled out deployments automatically. It was brilliant, but because it was built on Docker, it didn't go anywhere. It stayed in our staging environment. So the thing about this, though, is that there's this idea, especially at our very most senior level, that we want to go in every conversation with the assumption that people are coming to the table with positive intent. So if I had gone to that conversation with our EA department and I had assumed that they were trying to do the right thing for the overall department, I might have actually come away with a different conclusion. I might have actually said to my team, as their product owner, we need to find some other technology to use because we can't use a technology that we can't support in production. So let's figure out what our options are and figure out what we can do differently. I would have had that conversation, but because I went into those conversations with our EA team, assuming that they were going to give me a hard time, I completely tuned out what they were telling me, which pretty much wasn't fair. The third thing we were doing was we were having this situation, so no visibility leads to negative assumptions, leads to blame. Yes. So our CIO obviously put that word on a slide deck and said, do the DevOps, 2 thumbs up. Well, that didn't really translate into holding his team, and I'm going to use this word very deliberately, accountable to actually deliver said DevOps, right? What ended up happening was we were working with teams that had systems that were, they were dependent on clusters of nodes that supposedly were all supposed to be looking exactly the same and doing the same thing. But when we built the system, we built it with the concept that a cluster of nodes should all look the same. Sounds like a pretty simple concept, right? Well, in reality, that wasn't true. In fact, most of the teams we were working with had lots of technical debt that they were sitting on that was not prioritized, and one of those happened to be, this server over here looks different than all the other servers. Gosh, I wonder why. But they didn't have time to actually fix the problem or change the reason why they needed something different on that server to do some other test. And we couldn't get them to prioritize that either. And so every time we tried to run the code through the CI system, it would fall over once it hit that server because it wasn't seeing what it expected. And so instead of us saying, well, gosh, we've got a problem in this department in which we actually can't prioritize technical debt over feature work, we should probably have a conversation about that, we just said, well, gosh, our executives are not prioritizing this, so they're kind of jerks. I mean, seriously, what's wrong with them, right? This is so important, and we're not getting the visibility or the credibility that we needed to be successful. And you can probably guess that that was probably not a good idea for us, right? So any idea what blaming people for mistakes does? Yeah. So it prioritizes attention to the people that you're blaming and deprioritizes attention from the problem you're trying to solve. And so that is the worst part about finger pointing and blame. Yes, exactly. And so that this guy in the red and blue striped shirt spoke up. Now I'm finger pointing at him, and he's never going to say another thing in this presentation again. So that is really the truth and the horror of blame. And so now we've got no visibility, negative assumptions, and we're blaming people. And of course, we were just another silo in the IT department. Surprise! I mean, you guys all kind of called it earlier, right? This is not really something that we went into this knowing or not. I mean, we knew that this was a potential problem. We knew back even then that best practices state, do not create a DevOps team. You're going to have a bad time. But we thought we were better than that. We thought we could actually break free of that and make things better. In reality, it's not actually what happened. And the not surprising thing about this is that there is a well-known movie quote that kind of foreshadowed that this was a thing. And so if you are not familiar with Star Wars, that we have no knowledge of Princess Bride, so there's no knowledge of Star Wars in this room, Yoda is a very popular character in Star Wars mythology who stated, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, and hate leads to suffering. And this is the iconic quote of what happened with me and my team. But I am not going to leave you here so sad and thinking that all is lost and there's nothing you can do about it, because I think that would be a very bad presentation. So, what can we do about breaking that horrible cycle? I've always been someone who's been very direct and blunt, in case you didn't realize that. And I feel like if I shared the things that I have done to change my behavior, then maybe you could learn too. So the first thing about this is that we do not spend nearly as much time working on relationships at work as we do thinking about our technical problems, right? I can't tell you how hard it is for me in my career to actually have to redo the same conversation over and over and over again, in which it goes something like, engineer comes to me and says, well, I was having a hard conversation with engineer A, and engineer B yelled at engineer A, and now they're not talking to one another. What do I do about this? This is a conversation that I have had probably in the last month about 5 times. Hint, the answer is talk to them. Just saying, don't ignore it. And FYI, not on IRC or some email or text-based communication. You know, pick up the phone or get on a video conference and have a chat with them. So Fritz Heider in 1953 wrote a book called The Psychology of Interpersonal Relations. And I have a psychology undergraduate, and I had read this book back when I was in college about 20 years ago, surprise. And it was basically, I reread it a couple months ago, it's basically the guide for why we fail to do a good job at communicating with one another. So back in 1953, Fritz was already telling us why we were going to have these troubles in 2017 working together on software teams. And this idea wraps around this concept of common sense psychology. So all of us are equipped with the ability to perceive, or we think we are, to perceive what other people are sending to us so that we can actually have a conversation. And so if I'm moving my hands around and I'm, looking at you, or I'm wiggling my eyebrows, you can make an assumption about what I might be feeling, or come to some conclusion about, where I might be going with the conversation. The problem is that none of us take this common sense psychology into practice and actually build on top of it to become more of advanced communicators. That is the problem. And so without the practice, we fail again and again to do more than just common sense psychology. So we talked about the pits of despair. Now I'm going to talk to you about the circle of virtue. And so these guys are the, I guess you could call them the people that were tracking down Buttercup and Wesley. So you got the giant, the professor, and the swords guy. I can't remember their real names. I mean, this is kind of, I say, but really, I would love to employ these 3 guys from this movie to actually go out and teach my engineers how to actually behave. It would be an interesting thing to have a rock thrown at you, or to accidentally drink poison and or get skewered by a sword if you were doing something wrong. Anyway, that's not really the circle of virtue. It's really Buttercup and Wesley, in case you didn't know. which is a kind of a joke. So the first item is transparency. At Red Hat, we have this idea, maybe you have it at your company too, that sharing information makes us better, makes us capable of doing more with our knowledge than we would if we were individually working on something. When information is open, we have this ability to do more together. One of my favorite quotes internally, it gets passed around from time to time, is you are a smart person, but you're never smarter than everybody in the room. And so this is the foundation for how we work at Red Hat. I am constantly having a conversation with my engineers in which I am telling them that in order for them to be successful, they need to share what it is that they're doing. And so get feedback for your work. Do something where you are having some, interaction with somebody who might not be into the details. And the reasons why I do this is because we don't have the ability to really understand what's going on unless we set expectations for everybody. So being transparent doesn't necessarily just mean sharing and having to always have information going out. It's also setting expectations so people understand why you've made certain decisions. And so if I've made a decision that maybe people wouldn't like, I'm still going to set expectations so they're aware of the decision and they're aware that they might, have to maybe change their mind or do something different that they wouldn't otherwise have done. Some of the ways that we share information at Red Hat, we've got a really cool thing we do every Mondays at 10 a.m. We have what we call internal tech talks, where you just sign up and you come and you talk about what you're working on. It's really quite nice because it's the way to get information from other parts of the division to just learn what it is that they're working on. Maybe you're excited about AI, maybe you want to get involved in an open source project over here, and the person's going to come and talk about it. It's just a way for you to get connected and to learn. If you work in a company where transparency isn't a thing, you can still actually do this individually. So if you are thinking there's no way that there would be an organized tech talk, right? And I've been in a company where there would be no way that anybody would allow an organized tech talk, because gosh, an hour out of your week would be something you should be actually working and not sharing, right? Does that sound familiar? What I tell people is hang a sign in your break room and just say, hey, I'm going to go grab a beer or get some lunch at this place, and I want to talk about this exciting thing that I'm working on. Are you interested? And that might be a little bit out of your comfort zone, but I assure you, you will find somebody who is interested. And even if nothing ever changes, you at least have made a connection with somebody you might not have already made. The second thing that we like to, at least I like to encourage people to be, is open-minded. And what this means to me essentially is this once you make a decision, you might make that decision with the best of your ability, with the knowledge that you have at that moment. But if you get new information that comes in and you refuse to change your mind, and you should, all you are is a fanatic. And so the reason why I state this is because I know a lot of, and I certainly in the back half of my career had dealt with this quite some time, decisions being made that are completely unreasonable and do not make any sense. A lot of times people have this idea that once they've made the decision, their ego is attached to the decision and they cannot change their mind, right? Please don't be that person. It's okay to change your mind. It's even okay if you feel like you need to save face to explain why you've changed your mind. And in fact, I would encourage you, under the umbrella of transparency, to share why you're changing your mind. It's okay to do that. But if you are unwilling to ever consider new information coming in, all you're doing is effectively shutting down the idea that things change rapidly, and you may not have had the full picture when you made that initial decision. And just as a note, if you disagree with somebody in their decision, but they are firm in it, it doesn't actually mean you gotta hate them, okay? It really doesn't, I promise. I think that's also something that happens a lot in tech is, the proverbial, person over here who made this decision is really stupid and now I hate them. Really, it's okay, let that go, let that go. So the third thing is responsibility. And I mentioned the word accountability earlier, and I think a lot of people use that word accountability pretty loosely. Here's the reason why I don't like accountability. I have a project management background. Accountability to me means it's the person that I go to when things don't work, and I basically choke them. It's the throat to choke. And so if I want to hold somebody accountable, to me, that's a negative statement. If I'm asking somebody to be responsible, or somebody is stepping up and saying, I will be responsible for them, it's a choice. I'm asking somebody to take on the work. I'm asking somebody to, hey, we've got this thing. Would you like to be responsible for it? It's not a, you are accountable to get this done by X date. It's just a different way of thinking about it, and it's a different way of perceiving ownership of work. Also, one of the things I say to people all the time, and it's very much wrapped around the conversation of estimates. So if you're going to promise to do something by a certain point, A, don't ever put yourself in that situation if you can avoid it. B, if you say you're going to do something, do it. And if you're going to fail to deliver, make sure people know as early as possible. And the only reason why I say that, not because I'm a project manager, not because I'm worried about deadlines, is because what that does if you promise to do something and you fail to do it, and you also fail to say, hey, I don't think we're going to make this deadline, or I'm not keeping up, or I didn't estimate this correctly, is you effectively reduce the trust relationship that you might have had with that person who is there to support you. Now, I will be the first person to admit, especially with the wall of project managers, that sometimes those people are not on your side, and they are definitely there to, regardless of whether you're being responsible or accountable, they're there to point out that you're not doing your job okay, but don't give them a reason to distrust what you're saying. So do what you say when you're going to do it. And then finally, team-oriented. So I'm going to air quote, real team. So team to me means it's about the entire system. It's about everybody who has to participate to get the code out the door and into customers' hands. Oftentimes, I work with engineers who think they're the center of the universe. And how many of, yeah, go ahead. Raise your engineering hand. You are the center of the universe, right? Yes, you are. You are the center. You guys are totally the center of the universe. But not really, because here's the reason why. When you write code and the code is done and ready to go out to the customer, the code just doesn't go out to the customer. There's other things that actually have to happen. So at Red Hat, what that looks like is, because we don't sell code, we don't sell tools, we sell services. And one of the services that we sell is quality. And so we actually employ a very significant quality engineering department to do that. Double check to make sure the engineers are actually doing what they say they're doing via their automation. And so this quality, there's another check going in. So that's the first layer. And then even though we ask our engineers to write product documentation, we actually employ people who do this for a living, technical writers, so they can take the engineers' crayon-written documents and transform them into something a little bit more professional. So now we've got product documentation, we've got a well-built product with no quality issues, it's secure, it's beautiful. So guess what? People don't just buy software because you put it out there, right? It's just not. So you need to market it. And then so you need to understand what the market looks like. You need to understand how to drive the message that you're sending so that people understand, A, what you're selling, B, how to use what you're selling, and C, they actually buy it. And so then you've got the product management layer. And so all these people are part of this system. That's what I mean by team. I wanted to tell you guys about one thing that's really unique about Red Hat. We have this mailing list called Memo List. And in Memo List, it is basically free for all. You can say whatever you want to. You can even call out our CEO because he's made something, relatively, a stupid decision or something like that. You can do whatever you want in this mailing list, and no one really, well, not anything you want. The only thing we ask you not to do is call, your coworker a jerk or, some personal insult. But you really can say whatever it is that you're thinking or feeling. A very smart person said on this mailing list a couple of days ago, we had an outage that caused some production, caused some lack of productivity or productivity reduction, whatever you want to call it. But what basically happened was, of course, memo list thread, and you guys don't know what you're doing, blah, blah, blah. Here's, why did you do this? What happened here? And the whole intention of that thread was to essentially get more information out of people so that they can understand enough so they could tell them all the things that they had done wrong. And this one guy just simply stated, we all work for the same company. In fact, I brought my employee badge, which I don't know if you can see this on the back of it, says, we are Red Hat. And so we all work for the same company, and one of the things that you're making a mistake about is the fact that you're not trusting that team to have made the best decisions in the moment that with the information and the resources that they had. And it really resonated with me, not just because I used to work with the team that had to support the outage, but because I didn't like the fact that they were trying to second guess what it was that they had done in the situation that they were in. And so please don't do that to other people. So what can you do today? Here's some advice. How many think it's really easy to change what other people are doing or saying? Another trick question. It is, in fact, impossible. You can take my word for it. I have tried. My one piece of advice is forget about changing what other people are doing or saying and focus on doing it with yourself. A lot of people say to me, especially like, oh, how do I, change people's perceptions of doing the DevOps and making things easy? And I've got this person who's been entrenched in this position for 20 years and they'll never change. What do I do about that person? And my answer is always, I don't really care about that person. What do you need to change? So do not focus on other people, focus on yourself. However, also understand, and this is the lead by example, also understand that what you do actually can influence other people around you. And so if you are, my best example is, I go to a lot of meetings. In fact, I feel like I'm the queen of meeting facilitation at Red Hat. I just get randomly invited to meetings because somehow, somewhere along the way, when I show up, people snap to attention and stop participating in certain meeting behavior that I consider unsavory. And so because I have shown people how to have effective meetings, and these are not 3-hour meetings in which you're falling asleep or coding and not paying attention. These are productive and effective meetings in which we're in and out and we get what it is we're trying to do done and we finish. And so the idea, though, is that because I've shown people how to do this, yeah, I do go to the meetings, but it happens regardless of whether I'm in the room or not. And so by me showing people what I expect from them, they actually now participate in that behavior without me actually having to do or say anything. If I had said, will you guys all shut up, you're talking too much, and by the way, I do actually say that quite frequently, but if I had gone into it with the whip approach, it probably wouldn't have changed very quickly. The other thing is if you are in a situation, and I actually have had several conversations since even coming here, where people are in a company where the culture is just really bad. Here's my just general statement. I've been in there. I've been in a situation where I was financially unable to make a change, and it was a really bad situation. I was reporting to a guy who made a very inappropriate advance, and I wound up reporting to him for 7 years after that. And so you can imagine what that looked like for me in my career. It was very, very hostile. And so here's the general thing, though. What I failed to do properly back then was make a plan to get out of that situation, to actually change what it is that I was dealing with. And most importantly, a couple weeks ago, I was at Red Hat Summit, so it's similar to this, but 5 days long, and we invited Julia White from Microsoft to come and speak to the women's leadership team. And she said, she was actually asked a very similar question, like, what do you do when you're in a bad situation? And here was her answer. We are all technical professionals, and I assure you, there are jobs out there for you. The thing you have to remember is very, very serious. Do not rely on your employer to educate you. That's your first most important thing. And so if you're waiting for somebody to send you a training class and you've not learned any modern technology or modern development practices, that's your fault. So don't wait for your employer to do that. I'm going to change that. Do keep an eye on what's out there, even if you really like your job. Be aware of what's in the market, and that's because you need to be aware of the, jobs are not always there. They come and they flow, and so around Christmas in the U.S., things get really, really slow, but then probably in February they pick up again, and so you need to know what those bell curves look like, so you know when you can or when you can't make a change. And so most importantly, vote with your feet. And the last thing is, because we are at a continuous, insert word here, conference, the most important thing for you to understand is that all of this is foundational to the concept of continuous improvement. And so even I am not perfect. I know, it's surprising. It relates to the idea that you are never perfect and you always need to figure out what to improve. Because you are changing yourself, it's up to you to decide what that might look like. And I'm going to leave you with one last quote from my Uncle Ted. It's the most important quote, and I literally laughed out loud at this one during his wake, and I was very ashamed. This is it. Learning about yourself is like wiping your ass with a hoop. There's no end to it. Thank you very much.